The Money team officially confirms that they will attempt to qualify for this year's Daytona 500. Julio Castroneves has shown interest in NASCAR, and JTD Racing continues to consider possibly shutting down in the future. What's going, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to another video. We've got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. The first thing we're going to talk about is all the paint schemes and the sponsorship news. Let's go and just jump straight into those really quickly. The first paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Eric Almiral's 2022 Farmer John scheme that we're going to see in the LA Clash this week. I like this paint scheme a lot. It looks really cool. I love the color matches and everything. It's cool to see that Farmer John is once again sponsoring Eric Almiral in 2022. I think this will be the second year in a row that they're sponsoring him. So I think it's a really nice looking paint scheme, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack in 2022. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Brad Keselowski's 2021 Violent Defense scheme that we're going to see in 4 races in 2022. I love this paint scheme. It's really good. They do a really good job with the colors of the yellow and the purple. I like a lot of purple cars. This one's no exception. And on top of that, the number placement is really great on this car. It's my favorite next-gen paint scheme so far, and I'm really excited to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack in 2022. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Ross Chastain's 2020 Haller head scheme that we're going to see at the LA Clash. This, of course, is a partnership with Dana White, who is a UFC president, so it's really cool to see that Dana White is getting involved with this paint scheme. On top of that, I really like this paint scheme a lot. I like the orange, and I like the yellow, and all the stuff on this car. I think it looks really neat and cool, and I'm looking forward to see it out on the racetrack in 2022. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is David Ragan's 2022 Select Line scheme that we're going to see in this year's Daytona 500. I like this paint scheme a lot. It's cool to see that Select Lines is continuing to work of David Ragan heading into this year. I think it's a nice looking paint scheme, and I'm looking forward to see it out on the racetrack in 2022. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Austin Hill's 2022 Bennett family scheme that we're going to see in multiple races this upcoming season. I like this paint scheme a lot. I think they did a really solid job on this paint scheme. This is one of the many paint schemes that Austin Hill is going to have this year. I think it's a nice looking paint scheme, and I'm looking forward to see it out on the racetrack in 2022. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Austin Hill's 2022 United Rentals scheme that we're going to see in many races in the Xfinity Series in 2022. Like this paint scheme a lot. United Rentals paint schemes tend to look really cool. This one is no exception. I like it a lot. They did a really great job and a solid job on it, and I'm looking forward to see it out on the racetrack in 2022 as well. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Austin Hill's 2022 Global Industries scheme that we're going to see in a lot of races in the Xfinity Series in 2022. I like this paint scheme as well. It's a good looking paint scheme. Austin Hill has a lot of great paint schemes this year, and I think it's a good look for him going this year, and I'm looking forward to see it on the racetrack in 2022 as well. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Austin Hill's 2022 Alsco uniform scheme that we're going to see in a few races in 2022. I like this paint scheme a lot. The white and the green contrast on the car looks really great. They did a great job on the scheme. It looks cool, and I'm looking forward to seeing it on the racetrack in 2022 as well. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Corey LaJoie's 2022 Nations Guard scheme that we're going to see multiple races, including in this weekend's Los Angeles Clash at the Coliseum. I like this paint scheme a lot. I've always been kind of a fan of the Nations Guard scheme. I think with the number move forward, I think it looks really solid, and I really like it, and I'm looking forward to see it out on the racetrack in 2022 as well. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Bubba Wallace's 2022 DoorDash scheme that we're going to see in many races in 2022 as well. Great to see that DoorDash is continuing to partner up with Bubba Wallace this upcoming season. I really like this a lot. I like the change they've done to it. I also love the fact that they moved the number forward. I like it, the number 4 move forward as well. I think it's a very solid looking paint scheme, and I'm looking forward to see it on the racetrack in 2022 as well. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Christopher Bell's 2022 Sirius XM scheme that we're going to see in the Los Angeles Clash. I like this paint scheme a lot. I've always been a big fan of the Sirius XM schemes. This one's no exception. They did a really great job, a very solid job on this paint scheme, and I'm looking forward to see this out on the racetrack in 2022 as well. And the next paint scheme and the final paint scheme as of now we're taking a look at is Landon Castle's 2022 Voyager scheme that we're going to see in the LA Clash. I really like this paint scheme a lot. It is a very solid looking paint scheme. They did a really great job on this paint scheme with the color contrast and everything. I think it's a nice looking paint scheme. They did a really great job on it, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack in 2022. It's a nice looking paint scheme. To be perfectly honest with you, it's a great paint scheme. And now we're going to jump on all the other stories in today's episode. First story we're going to talk about is Keystone Light, as Keystone Light is going to sponsor Austin Cindric in 2022 in the All-Star race. Molson Coors has sponsored Team Penske, I think, for the last 35 years, and they will continue to sponsor him in 2022 as well, with Keystone Light sponsoring Austin Cindric. Paint scheme has not been revealed at this time, but it's really cool to see that Keystone Light is going to continue their partnership with this team heading into 2022. Once again, they have had their partnership for quite a few years now, so I think it's really, really solid, really awesome, and I cannot wait to see the car out on the racetrack in 2022 as well. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Pristine Auctions. As Pristine Auctions is now going to be an associate partner for Kevin Harvick and Eric Almirola in 2022 as well. Pristine Auctions last year sponsored some of the guys in the NASCAR Cup Series with Joe Gibbs Racing, and also sponsored Ty Gibbs for quite a few races as well. And now it looks like they're moving over to Stewart Haas Racing for 2022. I think it's really, really cool, to be honest with you. I think it's really, really solid that they are moving over to a new team and work with them heading into next year. Having them continue to work in their partnership stuff and changing other partnerships, I think is something really, really cool. And I'm glad to see that they're working with them heading into 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the truck race at Darlington, as they have their title sponsor officially revealed for that event, and it's going to be called the Dead on Tools 200. Dead on Tools is sponsoring, I think, quite a few races this year. I think they're sponsoring one of the truck races at, I think, Atlanta Motor Speedway, and I believe they're also going to be sponsoring the Xfinity Series race once again at Martinsville as well. So great to see the Dead on Tools continues their partnerships in NASCAR, and that is going to be the title sponsor for the Truck Series race at Darlington. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Market Rebellion. As Market Rebellion is going to be sponsoring the Monday Night Racing season finale that will be taking place live in Charlotte on February 7th, which is going to be this next week. Really, really awesome to see that Market Rebellion continues their partnerships and sponsorship. Of course, they're going to be sponsoring Tommy John Barnes' Alpha Prime Racing once again in 2022. So I think that's overall really, really incredible that they're continuing to continue doing work and all that stuff. I think that's something that's really, really solid, really, really great, and I'm glad to see that they will be sponsoring the final race for Monday Night Racing in 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Eric Dickerson and Jim Abbott. As they were announced on Race Hub this past week for the last couple of nights, they've been announcing some people for Grand Marshals. There's going to be quite a few Grand Marshals for this event, and two of the people that haven't announced are Eric Dickerson and Jim Abbott, who will be the Grand Marshals for the Busch Light Clash. Jim Abbott is a legendary baseball pitcher, and Eric Dickerson was, I think, a running back or somebody for the LA Rams. So it makes a lot of sense to bring both of them to be Grand Marshals for this event. This LA Clash is heating up to be one of the biggest events of the year, and with having these people on here, I think it's something that's really, really cool, very, very exciting, and welcome them to be your Grand Marshal in 2022. I think it's really, really great, really, really awesome, and I'm glad to see that they are going to be working with them once again in 2022, to be perfectly honest with you, and to be the Grand Marshals. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Brian Keselowski. As Brian Keselowski revealed on Twitter yesterday that he's going to be changing up what he's going to be doing starting in 2022. And one of the things he revealed is that he is going to be spotting for Gase Emerling Racing in 2022. Really cool to see that Brian Keselowski is getting into the spotter game. I think he's a guy that's done a really good job. He's been a guy that's been kind of crew chiefing for teams the last couple of years. I think crew chief for Rick Ware Racing this past year. I think he's also crew chief for other organizations in the truck series the last couple of years. So having him change up what he's going to be doing, I think it's something really, really great and something very, very awesome. I'm glad to see that he will be a spotter for this team heading into 2022 as well. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Josh Williams. As Zane Smith was on the Casey Campbell, was speaking to Casey Campbell, Casey Campbell was interviewing him, and he revealed that Josh Williams is going to be sponsoring for Zane Smith in 2022. Josh Williams, I believe, is also going to be spotting, I believe, for Ryan Blaney once again this year. So having a guy like Josh Williams working with Zane Smith, because I believe that Josh Williams has worked with Zane Smith in the past, and they have a really good collaboration working together. So it makes a ton of sense to bring him back to work with him heading into 2022. Overall, I think it's very, very exciting that they're continuing to work together heading into next year, and hopefully they can have a really, really good year in 2022. So I think if they can, I think it will be great for them. Hopefully they can have a great year in 2022, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Tim Richmond. As Tim Richmond revealed yesterday that he has basically announced how many races he'll run in ARCA in 2022, and he is going to run 11 out of the 20 ARCA races in 2022. For those you don't know, Tim Richmond recently was injured in a really, really bad accident, I believe, at Michigan after some issues happened, and unfortunately got into a really bad injury that really, really affected him due to a situation that happened on the racetrack. And because of that, he was not really able to race very, very recently. However, it looks like that Tim Richmond will be back racing in ARCA in 2022. I'm happy to see that he's back. I hope he races with Alex Club Racing. I believe he raced for Alex Club Racing last year, so happy to see he's back. I hope he can do very, very well and have some good runs because I think he is a driver that is very, very talented. It's just a shame that some situation because these young kids that come up in this sport and stuff sometimes race the way they do. But it is what it is, and we move on. So hopefully he'll do very, very good and have a chance to have a great year in the series, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Worldwide Technology Cup Series race. Now, NASCAR has not officially given out all the lengths of the races. Well, it looks like the Worldwide Technology Cup race, their length for the race has been officially revealed, and it's expected to be a 240-lap race in a 300-mile event. Yes, the NASCAR Cup Series for the first time will be racing at Worldwide Technology Raceway, and a 300-mile race at Worldwide Technology makes a ton of sense. The track is kind of similar to New Hampshire, so it makes a ton of sense for the race to be about a 240 lap and 300-mile event. I don't blame them for making it that short, to be perfectly honest with you. Again, it's actually really not that short. It's going to take some time because some of these truck series races, especially that are like 200 miles, they take a lot longer too. So it's probably going to be close to 3 to 3.5 hour long event, which is kind of the limit that the NASCAR races need to be anyways. So that's Worldwide Technology Raceway, and I think it's interesting that it's going to be a 240 lap and 300-mile event. So that is going to be the length of the Worldwide Technology Cup Series race. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Stephen Light. As Stephen Light basically, it's been revealed that Stephen Light says he will join a brand new Xfinity Series team to be announced in the coming weeks. Now, we don't know what team exactly he's going to be joining this year that's going to be joining, but there has been a recent rumor that has been coming up that this team is called Blue Ridge Racing with the number 46. Matthew Burrows, a fellow reporter who does something for 10tband.com, he's been doing some reporting for quite a time. You should go definitely check him out. He basically has been saying that most likely the team is going to be called like Blue Line Racing or Blue Racing or something like that. They're basically a new team that's coming, I think, with cryptocurrency. I'm not entirely sure, but they're a new Xfinity Series team. And a lot of people ask, why are there so many new teams coming into the Xfinity Series right now? Well, one of the big reasons why we're seeing such a surplus of new Xfinity Series teams right now is because of the fact that they are getting the Gen 6 cars. So that's why you're seeing this. Now, hopefully this team does show up to the racetrack, because it's unclear if they are. It's unclear because you can't trust sometimes these teams. But it's cool to see that there is a new team that's technically going to try to show up. Hopefully they do, because I think if they show up, I think it will be great for the sport, to be honest with you. So good luck, and hopefully that's the team that he drives for 2022, and hopefully they get some support from some other teams as well. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Sev Chafka. As has been basically reported at this point, that Sev Chafka is going to crew chief for Kyle Busch at the Los Angeles Clash. Now, the reason that he is going to crew chief for him at the Los Angeles Clash is because of the fact that Ben Bayshore has been suspended for this week due to the fact of the lug nut penalties from Phoenix. Now, this won't be an issue after this week. Lug nut violations are no longer going to be a thing in the sport due to, of course, us going to a single lug nut for 2022. But because there were still lug nut issues back last year, and they got a big lug nut penalties for, I think, having 3 lug nuts missing on the car, they suspended Ben Bayshore. Sev Chafka has crew chief for Kyle Busch a couple times. I think he's done a pretty solid job as a crew chief, and I think it's a good thing that at least is going to be only suspended for the exhibition race. It's good to see he's only suspended for that, and he's not suspended for one of the big races like the Daytona 500. So very interesting for sure. So hopefully we'll see him back at the racetrack very, very soon, and hopefully we can see Ben Bayshore back. But good luck to Sev Chafka this weekend, because he's going to need it. So it's going to be a tough weekend at the Los Angeles Clash. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the United States Air Force Thunderbirds. As once again for the Daytona 500, United States Air Force Thunderbirds are going to perform a flyover for the Daytona 500. United States Air Force Thunderbirds have basically been doing flyovers for many, many years at the Daytona 500, and once again having them back to do flyovers for the Daytona 500, I think is something that's really, really awesome and really, really great at the same time. So I'm very, very happy to see that the United States Air Force Thunderbirds are going to be flying over once again. I think having the flyover is great. I know some people are not going to like that because some people are not a big fan of flyovers and political stuff in NASCAR, but I think it's cool to see the United States Air Force Thunderbirds once again will be doing flyovers for the Daytona 500. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Tommy Baldwin. As there's been an update in regards to the roster portal in regards to the LA Clash, as Tommy Baldwin is expected to be the crew chief for Ryan Preece at the Busch Light Clash. I don't remember the other guy that was originally going to be the crew chief for Ryan Preece for this event, but Tommy Baldwin will be crew chiefing for Ryan Preece. Now, to give a backstory on Tommy Baldwin, well, he's a guy that is kind of got into race in NASCAR basically as a car owner. Tommy Baldwin, before he basically became a car owner, he was a really, really awesome crew chief. Crew chief for guys, I think, like Ward Burton, crew chief for Casey Kane when he's coming up, and also I think crew chief for Bill Elliott at points as well. So Tommy Baldwin knows how to get it done as a crew chief, and I think he's going to do a really, really good job being a crew chief for Ryan Preece, because Ryan Preece is going to need someone that could really help him out here, and Tommy Baldwin is a guy that just knows how to get it done. So I'm very excited to see that Tommy Baldwin is coming back to crew chief, and hopefully he can do really, really well in helping Ryan Preece have a good year this upcoming season. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Joey Cohan. As at this weekend's Los Angeles Clash, Joey Cohan, who's a competition director of Petty GMS Motorsports, he is going to be the crew chief for Ty Dillon at the Los Angeles Clash. Now, the reason that Jeremy Donnelly is not going to be the crew chief is because he's currently on baby watch right now, and with this being an exhibition event, it really does not matter. So with him being on baby watch over the coming weeks, he doesn't want to take the risk of flying out to Los Angeles and then having to fly back home. So they made the decision to put Joey Cohan as a crew chief for him this weekend. I'm very excited to see what Joey Cohan can do. I'm not entirely sure how much crew chiefing experience he has, but I think having him come in and be the crew chief for this upcoming weekend, I think is something that's really, really solid. And I hope that Joey Cohan can do a really, really great job being a crew chief for this team heading into this season. Hope he can do a good job being a crew chief for Ty Dillon this weekend at the LA Clash. And it's not a really important event, but hopefully he can do really, really well as a crew chief for Ty Dillon. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Gracie Trotter. As Gracie Trotter revealed to Casey Campbell that she has no ARCA plans for 2022 as of right now. Now, this does not entirely surprise me. Gracie Trotter did make a few starts in ARCA last year, and I'll be perfectly honest, her starts with Venturini Motorsports were not really that impressive. Yes, she really almost only ran super speedways. She wasn't entirely the most impressive. That being said, though, I do think that she deserves a potential opportunity once again to get to race. It is unfortunate, though, at this point that probably she won't have that opportunity to race as of now. That being said, I do think as we do get closer to the start of the season, as we get farther in the year, there's a potential she could get an opportunity to race with a team. I do believe that she is planning to do some late model races this year. I think that's one thing that she's planning to do this year. But as of right now, she's not planning to do any sort of racing in ARCA at the moment. So hopefully in the future, she can get an opportunity to get back in ARCA. But as of right now, it doesn't look like that she is at this moment planning to be in ARCA as of right now. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Martin Truex Jr. Now, media availabilities were made this past week, well, basically made yesterday, and Martin Truex Jr. was asked quite a few questions. The first thing that he actually said is that he's never raced on a quarter-mile racetrack. Now, of course, the Los Angeles Clash is going to be a quarter-mile racetrack, and there's going to be practice qualifying for this event, so Martin Truex Jr. is going to be able to get a lot of experience. But it's interesting, considering Martin Truex Jr. does have a lot of grassroots racing, it's kind of surprising he's never raced at a quarter-mile track. The next thing that was asked is that he says he does not look at being a car owner after he gets done racing, but he does say that you never know at this point. He wants to do some other future endeavors, but he would like to some point, maybe, he said he never know, he could come back into car ownership, but he says as of right now, he's not planning to get inside of the car ownership roles. He also was asked how he thinks the next-gen car will perform in a full field, 40-car field for the Daytona 500. His educated guess is it will perform more like Cup cars before the COT era, the car of tomorrow era. Now, back in like the mid to late 2000s, back in the day for Daytona, you used to see basically fields pull away, but you also would see some really, really incredible racing back in 2005 and 2006 in the super speedways. So that's just his educated guess. But We're not entirely sure the car is going to race in the Daytona 500. We may end up seeing one of the best races in the world. We might also end up seeing one of the worst NASCAR races we've ever seen. That's a very, very big possibility on both fronts. But I do think Mark Truex Jr. does have a very, very big point. We really don't know how this car is going to race. So I'm very interested to see how this car is going to race for Daytona. But Mark Truex Jr. answered some questions, and his questions that he answered were very, very interesting, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Swan Security. As was just announced from Ryan Vargas, the Swan Security is going to be continuing their partnership with Ryan Vargas in 2022, and they'll sponsor for multiple races in 2022. Swan Security sponsored Ryan Vargas for many, many races last year, and it's really, really awesome and really, really cool to see that they will continue their partnership with Ryan Vargas in 2022 for many, many races. Ryan Vargas will be looking to improve his performance in 2022, and hopefully with Swan Security jumping on board, they can help him have a really good year. So good luck to Ryan Vargas in 2022, and glad to see that Swan Security will continue their partnerships with Ryan Vargas for 2022. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Bubba Wallace. As Bubba Wallace has released a new merchandise clothing line with Columbia, and they will basically have merchandise with like shirts and pants and all that stuff. They'll continue partnership with Bubba Wallace this season. Sponsorship and car has not been revealed at this time, but most likely we'll have a car for this as well. But I think it's cool to see that Bubba Wallace is releasing his own clothing line. I think having Bubba work with Columbia makes a ton of sense considering they've had a partnership for the last couple of years now, and they will continue their partnership and their branding. They'll probably also sponsor Eric Jones at some point this year and work with him. But I think it's really cool to see that he's got a clothing line coming for 2022 as well. To be honest with you, I think it's a great story. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we've got something really, really awesome that was just announced. NASCAR has partnered up with FaZe Clan. As Adam Stern reports, NASCAR is partnering up with FaZe Clan to release a co-branded merchandise line for this weekend at the Los Angeles Coliseum, where several members of FaZe Clan are going to be on site for this event. Shirts and all merchandise will be around $35 to $75. This is freaking awesome. FaZe Clan, one of the most notable groups when it comes to Call of Duty, when it comes to shooter games, when it comes to groups in esports organizations, and a company that's been on such a big move for them now getting on the stock market. You think about FaZe Clan, and every young kid coming up knows what FaZe Clan is, and NASCAR partnering up with FaZe Clan is absolutely something that should be really make people happy. This is so cool to see that they're partnering up with FaZe Clan. You think about all the moves they're making, especially for the LA Clash, what they're doing for this event. But them partnering up with FaZe Clan is something so cool and so freaking awesome. I'm so excited to see them. Maybe they can get the Simon. That'd be cool if they had the Simon join work in NASCAR. But in all seriousness, this is such a cool partnership, and NASCAR is working with FaZe Clan. This will get in, and what this will do is bring a lot of new fans and audiences in as well. So overall, I think this is such a cool move, so exciting, and glad to see the NASCAR is partnering up with FaZe Clan for this year, to be honest with you. Now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Derek Griffith. As was just announced a few minutes ago that Derek Griffith will drive in multiple races for Sam Hunt Racing in 2022, driving, I believe, the number 26 car, and will make his first start in Marsville, and other races will be determined in the future. Derek Griffith is a driver that's had a lot of success in ARCA and ARCA East. He's contending for victories, and I think he may have won a race or two. And he's a driver that I think is very, very talented. And having him get an opportunity to race with his team, I think is something that's really, really cool and really, really awesome at the same time. What are my expectations? Well, this car is going to be potentially capable of finishing the top 10 and the top 15. So he's going to have some pretty decently high expectations in the car, but I think he is someone that really can live up to the hype. I think he's a very talented driver. He knows how to get it done. He knows what he's doing, and having a Conda series, I think is very, very awesome. So hope he can do a really, really good job with this team, and hope he can help this team have a great year in 2022 as well. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about some of the things that NASCAR talked about. And first story of that is practice and qualifying. NASCAR says teams allowed to change tires between practice and qualifying on regular race weeks. There won't be many changes allowed on once practice starts, much like impound races previously. Can't have all four wheels jacked at once with NASCAR officials here. No spring changes will be allowed as well. This is definitely very, very interesting, to be honest with you, that NASCAR is not going to be allowing many changes, very similar to an impound race with practice qualifying. So basically what this is going to be similar to is basically it's going to be like a warm-up session to get your cars warmed up and ready to go for the events. So Overall, very, very interesting for sure that NASCAR is only allowing a certain amount of things in regards to that. And we'll have to keep an eye on this. Could lead to some issues in the future, but it's definitely interesting that NASCAR has got some changes in regards to practice qualifying. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Atlanta and no locking bumper rules. Scott Miller says during this media availability that he says there likely will be a double yellow line rule for portions of the Atlanta track, but to be announced. This is not surprising, to be honest, that they're considering a double yellow line for Atlanta, considering basically it's now going to be a super speed race. So that does not overall surprise me that they're looking at making that like a similar to a super speedway race. He also says there will not be a no locking bumper rule for Cup in Daytona, so push drafting will be okay in Cup. I'm very, very happy about this, about the no locking bumper rule. I hate that no locking bumper rule. I think the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series needs to get rid of that rule. So I'm overall very, very happy that there is a there's no locking bumper rule. I think if they had that, that would have been a really, really bad call. So very, very happy that there is going to be a no locking bumper rule for Atlanta for the races, and I'm glad to see that. It looks like a yellow line rule is coming as well. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about shifting. As there was something NASCAR also mentioned during this media availability, they said some drivers are shifting at Phoenix. NASCAR says it is not currently changing any of the gearing rules, so they will be allowed to shift if they are comfortable with it. NASCAR will monitor it for the weekend, but they believe that the basic supply vendor chains will be able to be compatible with it. This is definitely very, very interesting because if you watch the Phoenix test this past couple of weeks, because we had a test at Phoenix very recently, NASCAR said that there were teams that were shifting out there. We noticed some interesting shifting happening at the event, and I think the teams should be allowed to do that. So I think that overall is something very, very interesting, and NASCAR is going to allow shifting. That's one thing that we're going to have to keep an eye on over time. This could lead to more engine failures in the cars. We may see more engine failures than before due to the changes of the cars. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to that, but that's the next thing on shifting. The next thing from this media availability was pit stop choreography. And we talked about this, I think, on the channel a couple days ago. But NASCAR basically confirms that NASCAR says it will start allowing different changes to approach from the front or the rear of the car starting at Atlanta Motor Speedway. There have been concerns about the nose and the wide bodies on the cars, but NASCAR says those should not be an issue, and these changes will start at Atlanta. I am very excited to see the teams are going to be allowed to change up their choreography, considering that this is going to be a new car. Teams are going to try to find ways to be very, very creative with it, and what they're going to try to do is they can approach from the front or they can approach from the rear. This could lead to faster times on pit road and could lead to pit times being a little bit quicker than they could be, which could lead to some teams having advantage over others. So that's one thing we'll watch over time, but I think it's cool to see that pit stop choreography, they're allowing changes into the pit stop choreography this season. And now we're going to go and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the Dash for Cash races that have officially been announced as well. So the 4 races that are going to be for the Dash for Cash. The first race will be at Richmond, the second race will be at Martinsville, the third race will be at Talladega, and the final race will be at Dover. Very similar to the Dash for Cash. It's pretty much straightforward. The top 4 finishers of the Dash for Cash that are available for that will be able to race. No Cup Series drivers will be allowed to race, so it will only be Xfinity Series drivers that will be allowed to race in these events. And that's a really cool thing. I wish that, Talladega probably shouldn't be one, maybe allow Cup guys to be in that one. But I do like the 4 Dash or Cash races. You've got 2 short tracks that are going to be allowed, and you've also got a mile track, and you've also got a super speedway. I like it. They're changing that up right there. They're basically allowing different types of tracks to be involved with that. So you're going to have different people that are going to be able to compete and not just the same 4 people over and over again, which you're not going to get that because of the competition in Xfinity. But I really like these 4 Dash or Cash races. I think that this will hopefully provide some really, really great racing, especially since Xfinity is going to be really competitive this year. And I like that these 4 are the 4 Dash or Cash races that we're going to see this year. And now we're going to go jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about next-gen testing. Now, there's going to be a couple more organizational tests that are going to happen in 2022. NASCAR, like I said, they have 2 more organizational tests planned for this year. The first test will be in Martinsville on August 23rd and 24th, which will take place, I think, late around the time the playoffs are going to start. And then the other test is going to take place at Homestead from September 20th and 21st. There's also plans to be wheel force tests that are going to be taking place in the future. Many of those kind of tests, entire tests, but they're going to have 2 major organizational tests coming up as well. Overall, very interesting that they're going to have 2 more organizational tests, and probably maybe we'll see some more updates in regards to next gen, what they're going to do with some of the next gen cars. Again, we're going to be close to the end of the first year with the next gen car because we're on, like I said, I mentioned, the playoffs are basically going to be nearly starting at this point for the next gen car. So overall, I'm very happy to see that there is going to be more next gen testings. I think the more next gen testing there is, the better it's going to be. You need to have as much testing as possible. Again, basically the season literally starts in less than a week. So NASCAR having more testing makes sense, and maybe some more updates going into 2022. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but very interesting that there's going to be more testing in regards to the next gen car, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about the Xfinity Series. Now, there is a change that's definitely caused some controversy for the NASCAR Xfinity Series. So, NASCAR said in their press that in the Xfinity Series, the teams must use the same chassis, engine, transmission for Auto Club in Las Vegas for the second and third races. It will help cut costs and manage the West Coast swing. Now, they can change wraps, other parts and pieces, etc. This is definitely very, very interesting. And honestly, I think some people are going to be for this and some people are going to be against this. I get what NASCAR is trying to do here. What they're trying to do is save the Xfinity Series teams money. Even in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, parts and pieces tend to cost a lot more than people realize. So NASCAR, what they're trying to do here with this change is they're trying to save these teams a ton of money so they don't have to spend as much money going into their programs. And like I said, these Xfinity Series owners, especially some of these smaller owners, can save a ton of money. But this could cause some major issues because, especially since we might see some big wrecks, how aggressive the Xfinity Series and Truck Series could end up being this year, it could cause a lot of problems right there. That being said, though, it's definitely an interesting change the Xfinity Series is having. I mean, look at the Cup Series. They're basically having issues getting shortages, parts, and stuff. And the Xfinity Series, this could be an issue going forward. But overall, I think this is a very, very interesting change that NASCAR is having here. And hopefully, it will lead to some great stuff. And I think teams will try to take care of each other. And hopefully, they can do a really, really good job this year taking care of each other. And that's the update in regards to Xfinity Series for the West Coast swing. This might be something that happens for a lot of other races. So we'll have to wait to see if this is a change that affects the racing. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the Triple Truck Challenge. Now, once again, the Triple Truck Challenge is going to be taking place. I think if you win one of the races, you get 50 grand. I think you win two of the races, you get 100 or 150 grand. And then for winning all three races, you get $500,000. So the races that have been announced, the three races are going to be at Gateway, and the second one will be Nashville, and the final race will be at Mid-Ohio. Knoxville and Sonoma, the two races in between those races will not be in the Triple Truck Challenge because again, we're probably going to see some Cup guys racing at Sonoma for the Truck Series event, and of course for Knoxville, there's going to be some Cup guys probably running the Knoxville race as well. I love the Triple Truck Challenge. I think the racing tends to be really, really good, especially in the Truck Series. So I overall like the Triple Truck Challenge, and I like that they're bringing those three races back for the Triple Truck Challenge as well. So I'm really excited about that. I love the Triple Truck Challenge. You get some really, really good racing overall. And again, having those three races be the Triple Truck Challenge, I think are very, very exciting. And hopefully, like I said, we'll see some really, really good racing from that. They've had it for the last couple of years. Marco Simone has done a really, really good job helping and promoting these events. And he's done a really, really good job with these events as well. So I'm very happy to see that they are bringing the Triple Truck Challenge back this year. I think it's a great event overall for the fans. And hopefully, it will create some really, really strong and really good racing this year, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Zane Smith. Now, Zane Smith was once again having this interview with Casey Campbell this past week, and he says that before the front row deal came along, he was set to go drive one of the Bill McAnally racing trucks. This is definitely very, very interesting because we know that next year Colby Howard and Derek Kraus will be driving the Bill McAnally racing trucks in 2022. But this is overall very, very interesting. Now, this would make a ton of sense considering that they basically bought GM, basically Bill McAnally Racing. They're switching to Chevy this year. And Zane Smith has been part of Chevy's development program for quite a few years now, really since around 2019 when he joined Junior Motorsports and drove part-time with them. And then for the last couple of years has been driving for GMS Racing. So I think that Chevy really wanted to keep him with them. But because of the fact that they signed Colby Howard and Derek Kraus is coming back to the team, they decided to go ahead and unfortunately let Zane Smith go from the Chevy program. And now Zane Smith is driving for Front Row Motorsports in 2022. Overall, Zane Smith, I think, made a better decision to go to Front Row Motorsports instead of Bill McAnally Racing. No disrespect to Bill McAnally Racing, but I think the Front Row trucks have been better the last couple of years. Yes, I know that's technically a DGR truck, but I do think that Zane Smith overall going to Front Row Motorsports, I think he's going to do a lot of really, really good job with the team heading into 2022. I'm very excited to see what Zane Smith can do this season, and hopefully in trucks he can do very, very well. But I think it's overall very interesting at the same time that Zane Smith had an opportunity to go to a team like Bill McIntyre Racing, but instead he decided to go to this team. So what I'm hoping is overall Zane Smith can have a great year with Front Row Motorsports. I think he's got a really good chance to win the championship this year, and I am very excited to see what Zane Smith can do for Front Row. He had a chance to stay in the Chevy programs, but I think Ford gained a really, really good development driver heading into this year. So hopefully he can have a really good year with the team and put on some great racing for the team for 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Andy Street. As it was officially revealed yesterday that basically the 21 car, and that will be driven by Austin Hill. We talked about that the number was expected to be that he would drive the 21 car, and the crew chief has been officially revealed, and the crew chief is going to be Andy Street in 2022 for Austin Hill. Now, Andy Street, for those who don't know, has been the crew chief for the last couple of years for the Rich Childress Racing Group. He was the crew chief last year for Maya Sider in 2021, excuse me. I think that he is a really, really solid crew chief. He's been a crew chief for Rich Childress Racing the last couple of years, and I think he's a really, really solid crew chief. And he's, like I said, he's been doing this for quite a few years now in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and having him once again crew chief for Austin Hill 2022 will be really, really good. And I think that this will be the first time in a couple of years that this team will be a championship contending team. Considering that we haven't seen Rich Childress Racing be a championship contending team the last couple of years, really since Todd Reddick's been around. You're going to have two really good drivers join this team. Of course, you're going to have Austin Hill driving the 21. And of course, you're going to have Sheldon Creed, who was a 2020 Truck Series champion, who will be driving a two-car truck this year. Overall, I'm very, very happy to see that this is going to be the crew chief for him heading into this year. I think Andy Street is a really, really solid and a really, really good crew chief, and hopefully he can have a great year in 2022, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about restarts. As there were some more details in regards to the media availabilities, and NASCAR made some more updates. First we'll talk about is restarts. NASCAR has made the start of the race just like all restarts. The number 2 starter can beat the pole sitter to the start line as long as they do not jump the start. NASCAR will not have any more judgment calls, and they will not be penalizing anyone if they go ahead and beat them to the line. I really like this rule change. Yes, I do think it should be fair. The leaders should be able to make it to the line first at the start of the race. But I like that they're going to be allowing competition at the start of these races as long as they don't jump the gas by mashing the gas sooner than the pole sitter. I really like that because I think that one of the biggest issues that has happened is there's been so many misjudgment calls and so many bad calls when it comes to these restarts. And we see the leader basically jumble up the starts, and we see the leaders basically have really, really terrible and really bad starts, and they jump up the field, and we see big reds on these restarts. So having the restarts, basically NASCAR basically determined, hey, we're going to go ahead and allow these teams basically tell the second place driver they can beat them to the line if they don't jump a start. I think overall is a very, very solid and a very, very great change as well. And I think it will create overall some very, very great and very exciting racing in 2022. So I overall like this change, and I'm glad to see that NASCAR is going to allow and go ahead and they're going to allow them to decide about restarts. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about rain and other factors. NASCAR did also say that they are going to add a clause to the rule book if race is called because of rain or another factor, that they can use video proof to determine the finishing order instead of the scoring loop. This will basically determine the finishing order and won't have issues when it comes to the scoring loop because sometimes they have issues in regards to where the finishing order was. They have had issues for a long time in regards to that, and now they're going to be allowed to use video proof for that. This, in my opinion, is a really, really good change because sometimes they have problems in regards to where the finishing order was and who won the race. It's similar to how they do it for the last lap of a race. When there's a caution on the last lap, this is how they're going to do it. Overall, I like this change a lot. I think him having this be a change that's coming in the NASCAR this year, I think is a really, really great and a very, very solid change as well. So I'm overall happy that they made this change. I think it's important sometimes that they have to make changes that are very, very important for the sport. So overall, I'm very, very happy to see that they decided to add this clause. I think having this clause is really, really important, and I'm glad to see that they made some changes in regards to that for 2022 as well. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the Los Angeles Clash at the Coliseum. Now, this was reported by Dustin Long, and he says that the Los Angeles Clash could host the Clash Road 2024, but after the Cup Series race at the Los Angeles Clash this upcoming weekend, NASCAR has 90 days after Sunday's race, so they would have until May 6th pretty much to make a decision if they're going to go ahead and pretty much decide if they are going to host this race through And NASCAR, like I mentioned, they have the decision to do this, and NASCAR would like to host a race after 2024. But what will make this decision very, very determined is if NASCAR is going to, if they want to really make this decision, like I said, they have until 2024 to make this decision overall. So I think what this really is going to be dependent on is if the race is going to do very, very well. That's one thing that has to be is if the race goes really, really well and fans really enjoy it. Because remember, about 50,000 fans are going to be in attendance for this event. They're going to have to make a decision in regard. They'll make a decision for the next couple of years, and NASCAR has to basically pursue it. Now, of course, that city is going to be one of the major determinations if this race will continue after 2024. Overall, I'm very, very excited to see if this, again, I would like to see this event return in the future if the event is very, very successful. But if it's not overall very, very successful, I'm not sure if I want to see this event overall really, really return, to be honest with you. But if it's a very successful event like the Los Angeles Clash, like how much money is going to be coming into the event, I think it could be very, very successful, though. So I really hope and pray that this event goes very, very well so we continue to see racing at the Los Angeles Clash in the future. So again, a quarter-mile track and then building up a quarter-mile track where they spent up over $1 million on, I think that it could put on a really, really great and really, really good racing package. So overall, I'm very, very excited to see what happens, and hopefully the race goes very, very well so we continue to see racing in the Los Angeles market. NASCAR's talking about maybe also going to other markets because this could open up the potential of other markets as well. So overall, I think it's really, really exciting, really, really cool, and I'm happy to see that there is consideration to potentially have another 2 more years. Again, it's a 3-year contract, but they have 2 option years, so this could be the only year, but we also could see this event continue to race after 2024 as well, too. We're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about ESPN. Now, this was reported by Adam Stern just a few minutes ago, and basically the executive of ESPN says that NASCAR was enormous property back then. He was speaking on a podcast, and he says, and maybe someday again, it could be a massive property. Now, why are we talking about ESPN? Well, remember, in a couple of years from now, there's going to be a new TV contract that's going to be starting in 2025. And the reason we're talking about this is because back in 2012, we kind of started hearing more details in regards to those TV deals and those TV contracts. And this TV deal and TV contract to me is probably the most important TV deal and TV contract that could ever happen. Probably the most important thing that's happening in our sport. And the reason that many changes are happening in our sport currently is because of this massive TV deal that's going to be coming. And we don't really know how much the cost and the price is going to be for that TV deal at the moment. We're expecting that the value of that TV deal is probably going to be less in value than we currently have at the moment. It's not going to be as much value. It's probably going to be more money, but that value is not going to be as important because remember, inflation is currently through the roof at the moment. But we had a projection about a couple months ago, and John Allen projected we may get Fox and ESPN as the 2 networks. To me, for the perfect TV networks, I think NBC and ESPN need to be the 2 main networks that you need to have for your broadcasting and your events. And if ESPN comes back, the biggest thing that they need to do is they need to try, in my opinion, they need to try to get Alan Bestwick back as a guy who covers the races. I think Alan Bestwick is a really, really good commentator, one of the best sports commentators to ever grace our sports. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards. But ESPN coming back could be a very, very important factor into the future of keeping NASCAR racing. So ESPN could come back, and the TV contract is really, really important, to be honest with you, for the future. We're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about some next-gen shortage issues. Now, basically, we've talked about these issues with supply chain problems. Rodney Childers basically was asked in regards to how many charters they currently have, and basically he says right now that they only have 1 completed chassis at the moment as of now. And basically, Bob Pockers did respond a little later in regards to these part shortages, and he basically responded and says that he has a Clash car plus Daytona car pretty much done. Teams can use the initial test cars for the Clash. Team has 2 other cars being worked but need parts and likely not ready when the haulers leave for Daytona. This is a massive concern currently at the moment because we've talked about this on the channel quite a few times that there are massive supply chain problems currently in the NASCAR Cup Series right now. And what is going on is that some teams are in a better position than others. You look at JTD Doherty. We talked about JTD Doherty, and we're going to talk about JTD Doherty here in a little bit. But what's going on with this team is JTD Doherty is they've got 3 or 4 chassis for their car. But with the next gen car currently at the moment right now, because it's coming from a vendor, a lot of teams are scrambling currently at the moment with the next gen car. And some of it is the fault of NASCAR, some of it is the fault of this pandemic. Remember, we're still in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic currently at the moment right now. And because of that, we're seeing a lot of shortages right now, and a lot of teams are having problems getting parts and pieces right now. And this, unfortunately, is affecting a lot of teams. And you think about it a little bit more, Stewart-Haas Racing did not even show up at the next gen test at Daytona, so they didn't want to risk their car. So they're a team that's basically going to have to use their initial test cars, which of course they can fly back to Daytona, and they also could use some of those backup cars as well. Overall, I definitely find it interesting that they're having a massive shortage in parts, and I think it's unfortunate because some teams are in a better position than others. Are there other teams that have not said anything that are having problems? Is Joe Gibbs Racing having problems? Is Hendrick Motorsports having problems? That's one thing we're going to have to wait and see if this could become a future down the road. Now, NASCAR has said, of course, that this should not affect the season, but honestly, I really don't know, to be perfectly honest with you, if it will affect the season or not at the start of the season. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to that. But that's the issue with the next gen shortages, and hopefully we'll see some things fixed in the future. I think as the season progresses, things will get better, but at least for the time being, this will be a massive problem, at least for the start of the season as of right now. And now we're going to jump on to the first of 3 major stories of today's episode, as we're talking about JTG Doherty Racing. Now, on the Teardown podcast with Jordan Bianchi and Jeff Gluck, they're basically reviewing each and every single team heading into the season. And then they came up to JTG Doherty Racing, and they talked about how they've had conversations about getting out of NASCAR for some time now, and they're still having these conversations of getting out of the sport. One thing they also mentioned is they're really not affiliated with Chevy. Of course, they are a Chevy team, but they're not really affiliated with the Chevy brand. This definitely is not surprising. There's been talk for a while about JTD Doherty Racing. They've talked about for a while they have considered shutting their organization down or selling their organization. Remember, there was some really, really wild rumors where Kevin Harvick was potentially going to buy into JT Doherty Racing and to buy up their organization for 2023 or 2024. So there have been conversations in regards to that. But I'll talk about JT Doherty here for a second. I think it would definitely be really, really unfortunate for JT Doherty if they left the sport. But it wouldn't surprise me, to be honest with you, if they did leave the sport. Considering JT Doherty Racing, they're a team that really hasn't improved over the last couple of years. I mean, you look at JT Doherty Racing, they're basically a playoff team at best. And no disrespect to Ricky Stenhouse Jr., I think Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is a driver that's really, really improved over the last couple of years. But I don't think Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is a driver that's going to go out there and win a championship. Now, with the next-gen car, this team could end up being a lot better. They can end up being a team that shows a lot more pace and a lot more speed. But I will say one thing in regards to this. I would not, again, I don't think it will happen in 2023. I think if they are a team, their team, at least for the future, at least for the near future, will be around. But I think that this could be something that could be a massive concern once we get down to the future of racing. This could be, their team could shut down in 2024 or 2025 or sell their team to the near future. And one thing that's really, I think if you were going to get out of the sport, I think if they were wanting to leave the sport, why not just get out of the sport in 2020 after last year? Because last year would, in my opinion, if you're going to sell your team and leave the sport, last year really would have been the year to do it. Because how much charters were being, I mean, Denny Hamel talked about this, that he bought his charter from Starcom Racing for $13.5 million. Why not just get out of sport then and wait until, or do I just wait and then go ahead and sell your organization then? I think if they were going to leave the sport, they should have left after 2021. But if they are going to sell their team, it wouldn't surprise me because they're not going to get as much value if they sell their charters now, because the value of charters isn't going to go through the roof. But if they shut their team down after this year, what team could step up and take over and take the charter? Junior Motorsports is the obvious choice. Junior Motorsports is a team that's looking to jump up to the Cup Series at the moment, and they would like to jump up to the Cup Series in 2023. And if JT Doherty Racing does sell their team after 2022, and they leave after 2022, this would put Stenhouse basically, unfortunately, out of the sport, or potentially down to a smaller team and not racing very well. That being said, though, we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to that with JT Doherty Racing, if they're going to continue to race or not in the Cup Series. But there is massive concern about JT Doherty Racing's future. Will they stay in the sport after 2022, or will they shut down after 2022, or will they continue? That's one thing we'll have to wait and see what happens. But JT Doherty Racing continues to talk about potentially selling their organization for the future. And now we're going to jump on to the next major story of today's episode as we're talking about Helio Castroneves. Now, Helio Castroneves this past weekend just won the Rolex 24 with Meyershank Racing, and he's had an incredible resurgence for his career. He's won 2 back-to-back Rolex 24s in 2021 with Wayne Taylor Racing, and also 2021 won his 4th Indianapolis 500 and has a very strong possibility of becoming the first driver to win 5 Indianapolis 500s. It helps, of course, he's going to have signed Pagano as a teammate. Now, he was on Sirius XM NASCAR radio after winning the event, and he says that he has interest in racing in NASCAR. That's right. He mentioned is that he's had interest in NASCAR for a very, very long time. And he mentioned that he basically wanted to do it for many, many years. He's wanted to race in NASCAR. But he said that Roger Penske denied him the opportunity to race. He said he asked every year or two that he was not really begged him all the time. Every year or two, said, can I try out a NASCAR race? Can I go into a NASCAR race? And Roger Penske basically told him that I don't want you to go and race in NASCAR. I don't want you to do that. Well, because now that he is no longer with Team Penske, he's now with Meyershank, he says he would like to do some racing, and he says that he potentially could have an opportunity to race in those events. He said he'd like to race in Daytona 500 or in a road course race in the NASCAR Cup Series. Honestly, I would love to see Helio Castroneves. If there's anybody outside of NASCAR that I've wanted to ever see race in the Cup Series or race in NASCAR, Helio Castroneves has been my _1 guy. I am a massive, massive fan of Helio Castroneves. Not only is Helio Castroneves one of the greatest race car drivers ever, he's won IMSA championships, and he's also won the Indianapolis 500 4 times, but Helio Castroneves is a driver that has such a good personality. He's great personality for any sport he gets into, whether it's the SRX or whatever series he competes in. He's a driver that is very, very competitive and shows a lot of pace. Now, NASCAR, of course, is very, very different, but he did actually race in the SRX this past year, and SRX is not 100% the same thing as NASCAR. It's basically similar to NASCAR in a sense, basically on short tracks, and I think that he did really, really well in dirt racing, and he's been doing a lot of different forms of racing throughout his career, and I think that he would love, in my opinion, I think he would love to come over to NASCAR, and I think NASCAR fans would love to have Helio Castroneves race. Now, what team could Helio Castroneves race? Maybe Meyershank Racing decides to jump into NASCAR. They jump into IndyCar and they become a successful team. They've got a really successful IMSA team, and SiriusXM is backing them, and they've got backing from an organization. Why not them come over to NASCAR? I think it'd be cool to have them come over. Why not a team like Ricker Racing give them a one-off opportunity? What about Team Haysburg's giving them an opportunity? And do I think it will happen this year? Honestly, no. I don't think it will happen this year, but I think in the near future, we could see a driver like Helio Castroneves come over to NASCAR and race. And of course, we are starting to see some sort of an open wheel resurgence in NASCAR. You think about guys like Santino Ferrucci and Sage Karam. They've been coming over to NASCAR. James Davison, another driver from IndyCar. And we've seen drivers like Joseph Newgarden and even Daniel Ricciardo. They've shown interest in potentially going back to NASCAR as well. So overall, I'd love to see Helio Castroneves get an opportunity to race in NASCAR. I think it'd be really, really cool if he came over, because a driver like Helio Castroneves, who has an incredible caliber of a driver like he is, I think he could be a driver that's really, really good and very, very successful in the sport. So I would love to see Helio Castroneves come over and race in NASCAR, and I think he could be someone that's very successful. Again, we're not sure because NASCAR is such a different beast than IndyCar and other types of racing he's raced in, but I think it'd be really, really cool if a guy like Helio Castroneves got the opportunity to race. I think he'd be awesome, and I think he'd be great for the sport. And having him in the sport would be very, very awesome, to be honest with you. So hopefully we may see him in the future, but we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to that. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Money Team Racing. Now, we talked about his channel about a week or two ago. Then we said that there had been a rumor, basically it's been started for the last couple of weeks, that that the Money Team was going to show up for the Daytona 500, and Kaz Grala was going to be the driver. Well, it was officially revealed yesterday that the Money Team Racing is going to attempt to qualify for this year's Daytona 500. Kaz Grala will drive the number 50 car for this team, and Tony Eury Jr. will be the crew chief for this team as well. They will have ECR engines this year, and they will be using number 50. They will have Pit Vipers as a sponsor for 5 races. I will tell you, I am super pumped up and super excited that the Money Team is involved. And One thing to note about the money team is there's a couple big important things. One, Floyd Mayweather is involved with this team. We didn't think that Floyd Mayweather initially was involved in the money team, but we now know that Floyd Mayweather has a lot of association with this team. And having a celebrity guy like Floyd Mayweather join the NASCAR Cup Series as a team owner, along with guys like Pitbull and Michael Jordan, even Frankie Muniz potentially joining, is something that's really, really awesome. Floyd Mayweather, of course, is one of the greatest boxers of all time. He's 50. He basically has won 50. He's been undefeated. Technically, has a time when he fought Logan Paul, but he's technically still is undefeated in his boxing career. Now, what is their schedule for 2022? Ultimately, the plan for this team is they're looking to basically what they're looking at doing right now is they're looking to run up to 15 races this year, potentially running part-time in the NASCAR Cup Series. Now, they, of course, will have to attempt to qualify for this event as well. They'll be looking to they're going to be attempting to qualify into the event as well. Another major important thing to note about this team as well is that they are basically the ghost of Starcom Racing. Starcom Racing, the guys who ran the Starcom Racing organization, not Derek Cobb and his family, but the other guys who ran the organization of Starcom Racing, they are also involved in this team. And basically, this is a ghost of Starcom Racing. And this actually makes a lot of sense why Kaz Grala is the driver. You think about that test that took place not very long ago at Charlotte, back on the Charlotte Road Course test in October. Starcom Racing was at that test. They were testing the next-gen car. We all thought the Starcom Racing may run part-time in the Cup Series, but then they confirmed that they were not going to be doing that. So that makes a lot of sense why Kaz Grala is a driver. First thing I want to say about Kaz Grala, I am very happy that Kaz Grala is going to be driving this car. Kaz Grala is a very, very solid driver. He's a really good super speedway racer, and he finished in, I believe, in the top 5 at Talladega earlier this year, and has been really good, especially in super speedways. Now, what are the realistic opportunities of them potentially making the Daytona 500? I think it's very, very possible. Kaz Grala, like I just mentioned a second ago, he's a very solid driver and gets the best out of his equipment. On top of that, I think that Kaz Grala is a really, like I said, a really good super speed racer. He won a truck series race for GMS Racing in 2017, so he knows how to get it done on super speedway tracks. So I think that Kaz Grala has a very strong possibility of making this year's Daytona 500. Also, let's talk about Tony Eury Jr. Tony Eury Jr. is one of the greatest crew chiefs of all time. He's crew chief for Kaz Grala in the past when they were Fury Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series back in 2018. He also is crew chief for Dale Earnhardt Jr., crew chief for Danica Patrick. He's a guy that's also contended for championships and also has contended for many, many wins in the NASCAR Cup Series. Now, what are my overall expectations for the money team? First of all, it looks like that they're going to show up. I know some people are going to say that they're probably not going to, and they're lying, but I think that they're absolutely going to show up. They would not announce as if they're not going to show up, unless you're a biker racing who says they're going to show up, and they're not going to show up. But I think that this team will probably be not the best team out there. I think they will do a little bit better because they have Kaz Grala driving the car, and I think that they'll do pretty decent. But I don't expect that this team is going to contend for victories unless we go to super speedway. I think that they will contend for some top 30s. I know that's a little bit high expectations for a new team, and we've seen some new teams struggle, and I know it's the ghost of Starcom Racing. But they do have ECR engines, and that's going to help their team heading into 2022. And with a new reset of a car, having to come into sport is really, really awesome. Now, with this team showing up, we're now expecting around 42 to 43 cars to attempt to qualify for the event. So far, there are 5 confirmed. Extra entries, we got 41 confirmed. You've got Timmy on the 66, no Grace in the 6'2", Money Team 50. You've got the 13 for JJ Yeley. And of course, you have another car as well. But you're also hearing talks that Greg Biffle could drive the 44 for NY Racing as well. I am overall extremely happy to see that the Money Team is showing up, and good luck to them, and welcome Floyd Mayweather and the Money Team to sport. Hopefully they can have a great year in the Cup Series, to be honest with you. So anyway, that's today's lawn, NASCAR news, and motorsports video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notification on to be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links go below for that, and comment your thoughts on today's video. Let me know your thoughts about the Money Team showing up. Do you think they'll actually show up, and do you think they'll make the Daytona 500 or not? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about all the other stories we discussed here today on the channel? Let me know in the comments below. First of all, I want to apologize for me not sounding really, really good in this video and coughing a lot. I unfortunately am still recovering from something at the moment, so hopefully I feel better really, really soon and can produce better content. Also, Race Picks is returning to the channel tomorrow. I'm going to be doing Race Picks for the Busch Light Clash, so be excited for that. So anyway, guys, I'll see you guys next time for some more great, awesome NASCAR and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.